Hello! Here's a bonus video just looking into different ways that we can structure our lessons. In the video we're going to be looking at 4 different ways of thinking about how to structure learning. There are many more than 4, but we're going to look at these. First up we have Kolb's learning cycle. You might have come across this before. The use of Kolb when it comes to planning lessons really comes about when we think about making learning experiential. So Kolb, as we might remember, has a theory about how people kind of naturally learn from their experiences as they go about their lives. So it's about kind of orientating learning towards that natural process. Can be used to make theoretical information practical, or to just get students, learning usefully from the things that they do. Secondly, we have PAR, which stands for Present, Apply, Review, which is just a really simple, straightforward, quite practical model from Jeff Petty. It's about presenting a new idea, getting students to use it, and reviewing what they've learned. Another somewhat similar approach is direct instruction, which is a particularly kind of well formulated and well evidenced method for getting students to get mastery over specific skills and ideas, really in as short as time as possible. So it's a kind of very precise, very efficient method to get students to learn a particular thing, focusing on eliminating misconceptions and errors. And then finally, we have a much more intuitive model, much more kind of broad, holistic way of thinking about lessons, which all has to do with the pacing of sessions and helping create a positive arc to the learning. So fundamentally, I think we do need to play with these ideas. We need to try them out in order to see what kind of benefits we can get. So pick a couple you're interested in, think about how they might work for your particular lessons, and have a go. So let's look at Kolb then. Kolb's experiential learning cycle is admittedly a little bit more complex than we're going to give it credit for here. But broadly, when thinking about how we structure lessons, we can think about students progressing from first doing something, participating in an activity, performing, undertaking a certain task. They then have to go through some kind of process of understanding that thing that they just did. So reflecting on a performance, reflecting on something they've listened to, working out how did it go, what were the qualities of that performance. Did I perform well? Did I not perform well? Maybe students get feedback at this stage. But really kind of understanding what was that thing that they've just done. Well, once they've done that, then they need to kind of broaden it out. They need to link it to other things that they know. It could be relating to previous performances that they've done, kind of previous times they've gone through a particular task. Or it could be relating to theoretical ideas, things that maybe they've learnt already, things that they've read. Or you can actually get students to kind of theorise and form explanations for the thing that they've just done. Then, using that new knowledge, students will need to kind of plan, they'll need to think about the next performance that they might do. So again, all relating to this particular task or particular skill, using the knowledge that they've generated through reflection and linking ideas to theory in order to plan another experience. And as the story goes, students would then have another performance or experience they would do again, they would reflect again, and then they would link it back in. Maybe the new performance corresponds to or challenges the theory. So in a sense there's this kind of ongoing cyclical nature for students doing things, thinking about them, explaining them more deeply, and then planning to use that knowledge in the future. So in a kind of lesson format, you could use this in lots of different ways. You could start at particular places in the cycle, but broadly you can think about getting students to move through these steps, perhaps with different lesson activities at each one of these stages. Now, what we do tend to see when people use this model, honestly, is that they kind of start strong. Maybe there's a really strong student performance, a band gets up on stage, you spend a lot of time doing the thing, and then it kind of gets progressively weaker the further around the cycle you go. So you spend maybe half as much time reflecting on the performance. Maybe you don't get much time to then link it into the theory to really kind of deepen what students know. And maybe the planning for how they're going to use that knowledge in the future is just completely left up to the students to decide. You don't actually have an activity for it. So some kind of key parameters to think about when using Kolb are just ensure that each stage of this process is well catered for. You're giving students adequate time to do the thing, to reflect on it, to link it to other aspects of their knowledge, and to make plans. Think about how you might scaffold those processes and help students overcome particular issues they have. And if possible, get the student to do it a second time, go multiple times round the cycle. These can all help make Kolb work really well. Next up, we have PAR, which, as I said, stands for Present, Apply, Review. So in the present stage of a lesson, you're really kind of orientating students towards what they're going to learn. You're helping them prepare for a new piece of information, you're clarifying the goals, and then you introduce and teach some new material that the students need to understand. So you're presenting the thing that they're going to be using. You'll probably want to think about getting feedback from the student to inform your knowledge of whether they've actually, acquired that information or not. You might actually need to give feedback back to your student about whether they've actually misconstrued the particular information or not. So that there can be a bit of kind of dialogue going back and forth. It's not just kind of here's the ideas, it's here's the ideas, have you understood them? Okay, but once students have understood them, they can then apply the material in some way. So here you get students to work towards specific goals where they actually apply that learning into new situations. So it could be that you have presented a particular theory or a particular kind of say a way of writing, a particular songwriting method, for example. You've shown it to students, you've modelled it to them. Well, now they have an opportunity to practice, to go apply, to use that method and to see what they get out of it. And again, here at this stage, there's going to be a kind of two-way feedback process. So you'll want to understand from your students how well they're applying this thing. And then you'll probably want to feed back to them that information. How well are they doing? What could they do better? Etc. Now, once students have actually had a go for themselves, you need to close the lesson down in some way. And so you'll want to clarify, summarise, what has been learned. So you kind of, maybe want to ask the students or maybe give them your impression of the main takeaways. And you'll probably want to direct them to further study that they might engage in. Now, again, you could think about this constituting a form of back and forth feedback for the learner and feedback for you as the teacher. Now, roughly, if you want to think about this very practically, you might think about the present stage taking about, a third of your lesson maximum. You really want to keep this relatively short and specific, but giving students enough information to really understand what you're trying to teach them. Then the majority of the lesson, I would say really a minimum of 60%, really over half the lesson should be students practically working towards the thing that they're doing. And then finally, as a review stage, this could be quite thin, could only be about 5% of the lesson, but you do need to spend some time just reviewing, just kind of getting a sense of where you've come to and where you're going to go next. So that's PAR. Now, direct instruction. Direct instruction is relatively similar to present, apply, review, but it's much more focused on specific kind of small isolatable skills and pieces of knowledge that you want students to be able to do very well, as in do with kind of no deviation from the prescribed method. Using direct instruction, you are similarly going to introduce the lesson. You're going to perhaps review stuff that students have previously learnt and connected it to the new knowledge. You're going to help them develop their understanding of the thing that they're now doing in their learning. You're going to spend a lot of time guiding them through how to practice that particular thing. So the guided aspect of this kind of apply stage is really crucial to direct instruction. As a teacher, you're going to be very active in some specific things that students will do here. You will close down the practice in a kind of formal way. You'll review how they've kind of learnt in that, and then you will set them independent practice. This could actually be during the lesson or outside of the lesson, but in some ways students need to have a go without you guiding and scaffolding the process. And then at the end of that, again, it could be in the lesson, could be outside the lesson, there needs to be some formal evaluation that can kind of measure how well the students can now do without your input and your support. Okay, so to go through again, we introduce the new learning, we set the stage. We then develop their knowledge of the thing to be learned through modelling the expected learning outcomes. We show them what it means to do the thing. We provide very clear explanations. We give examples. We then guide them to practice and to apply this learning in very specific tasks, and we monitor students throughout those tasks and give them specific feedback here. The idea is that we need to identify all of the misconceptions, all of the errors in students' practice, and get rid of them. We need to help them to do the thing as best as possible in this stage. Then we give that kind of that arc or that lesson a conclusion. We highlight what was covered, and then we move on to giving students time to actually practice this stuff without tutor input. So providing independent learning tasks that don't require us to be there. And then, of course, at the end of the whole process, we assess how far they've come and let them know just how much they've learnt in that period of time. Now, if you're interested in reading up a bit more about direct instruction, Paul Kirshner is a good person to look into. He is a big advocate of direct instruction, as is John Hattie. In the book Visible Learning for Teachers, you can look at chapter 4, which kind of takes you through this method as well. Now, direct instruction is shown to be a very effective method if your interest in teaching is to help students kind of raise their test scores or to learn very specific skills and have mastery over those skills. It has caused somewhat of a controversy for teachers slightly more interested in divergent or creative approaches, but still it's really effective for what it does. And then last up, we've got a much more emotive, much more kind of intuitive way of thinking about the shape of a lesson overall. Now, this curve that you're seeing on the screen, this kind of Nike tick, could represent many things. Could represent energy, confidence levels of your students' level of kind of certainty and understanding. But it's mainly something that we can kind of gauge through the feel, the vibe of a room. Okay? And we're just going to imagine it kind of plotted on a graph. So for left to right is in terms of the start of a lesson through to the end of a lesson. The idea is that when we kind of get into things, when we introduce a lesson, we really want to start on a high note. There needs to be a kind of high level of energy. We need to get students very confident, engaged. We need to be certain about what we're doing. Then things kind of take a dip, not in a bad way, but students need to kind of encounter the difficulty of a subject. You know, when they actually kind of get to grips with the material, it might be a bit kind of frustrating or difficult, but that can be really useful for the learning process. And so as a teacher, we need to think about kind of not rescuing too soon, but letting students kind of struggle a bit and really have to make sense of things for themselves. We might think about the midpoint of a lesson kind of representing the bottom of the curve, you know, the kind of the deep dark crevices of, I don't want to say negativity, but, you know, difficulty and challenge, and, you know, those things as productive to the learning process. Then throughout the rest of the lesson, again, we need to make sure that we have enough time for this, but we need to build students back up. So perhaps giving them some more support, or perhaps just kind of celebrating successes students are having, ways that we can, again, get the energy, get the confidence, get the certainty back up. The key here is to not leave students kind of stuck in the learning process, but to give everyone a bit of a way out. And then finally, we can think about, the tick kind of rising back up higher than it started. So aiming to leave students with a higher level of understanding, higher level of confidence, energy than they entered the room with. So you can see there are kind of lots of different ways we can slice learning and structuring teaching. But those are 4 different ways that might prove useful for you. Have fun.